This story happened when I was younger and braver, and did a lot of stupid things without thinking beforehand. It's quite a wild ride, and it's all true as well. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 p.m. until closing. I usually didn't get off until 11 or so at night because of this. I did have a car, but it was close enough to walk, so I mostly did that to save gas. This particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists and very tired. I was happy to have such a good job though, and generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead, about a block or so from my place, I saw a pretty attractive guy in dark clothing walking around. Not with much purpose really. He was taller than me, about 5'10" to 6 foot-ish or so, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like even in the dark of night, I could feel myself blushing a little. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out, and because I'm from a dangerous city and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him a bit. Hey, how's your night going? Oh, it's good, just looking to get drunk. Oh, that I can help with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I live just down the street if you want. That was not exactly verbatim how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I didn't really get any red flags from this guy either. He seemed totally normal and was actually pretty nice. I was honestly thinking, wow, through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy that seems cool and fun. I was beside myself really. We get to my apartment on the second floor. I jump into host mode and offer him to have a seat and make himself comfortable. The apartment was about 640 square feet in total, so it was pretty small. Except for the bathroom, you could pretty much see the rest of the apartment from any area inside. I headed into the kitchen, and while I was pouring the drinks, I glanced back over at him out of curiosity. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he was more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he was on our walk there. He was starting to act kind of odd. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink, and sit down next to him. So, what do you do for work? I asked. Oh, I'm not here for sex. He put down his drink on the table. What do you mean? I'm not here for that either. He stood up. What you got? He asked me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face were now gone. I was having a hard time understanding what he meant by that. I said, what you got? The second I stood up, he pushed me backward. I basically got knocked off my feet, hitting the floor but not hard enough to get knocked out or anything. I jumped right back up, but he'd already grabbed my laptop and my work bag. As I started towards him, he cut around me and made his way toward the front door. I was right behind him when he made it outside. I managed to grab a hold of him, and we tussled again in front of the door. Now I shouted out, calling on help from the neighbors. It was late at night though, so no one came. Please help, I'm being robbed! The thing is, he had my laptop. Not just any laptop, I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that computer at the time. Important photos I didn't have backed up, thousands of dollars in music programs, video game programming stuff for a development team I helped, really expensive software. It was in my mind irreplaceable. I gave chase down the stairs across the dog walk park, and as I started to gain on him, we tussled again. The only thing I could focus on was my laptop. I knew I had to, at any cost, get that computer back. That was all I cared about. Somehow I got a grip on it. I tugged at it again. I guess he decided it was not worth all this struggle. He got up and started to take off once again. I realized he still had my work bag, which had my cell phone and my wallet in it. I ran after him again. This time he shouted back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This made me stop in my tracks as he got away. Underneath a street lamp nearby along the sidewalk, I immediately started to inspect myself. I was stabbed? No way. There was no way that just happened. Then I saw blood running down my leg. I saw blood pouring down my arm too. I saw 2 places where he cut me real good. I was scared, but the blood made it look worse than it was. I decided that was enough. I got my laptop, and that's all I really needed anyway. I hobbled back home, got inside, and locked my door. I called the cops using my neighbor's friend's phone the next day, and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds. I also declined medical services, since I couldn't afford that at the moment. In the end, all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $30 in it. The cop called my friend back several days later and said they were not able to find the guy and that they would keep me posted in the future. That was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now, but I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. I'm a woman in my 30s who lives alone in a small house at the head of a quiet cul-de-sac in the UK. The street is a maze of roads away from the main road, which means that other than delivery guys and the occasional salesperson, you will rarely ever see anyone you don't recognize. I don't exactly know all my neighbors even. I do know what they look like though, and I at least know the area around where they live. I can recognize some of their cars, etc. This weirdness happened over the space of a few months several years back. I work from home, so I'm usually inside. Sometimes I don't have a lot to do either. The first day was one of those lazy days. It was about 4 p.m. and I was sitting on the sofa, watching some daft shit about alien cover-ups. All of a sudden though, someone knocked on the door. I have a surveillance camera hidden in the wooden canopy above the front door, so I checked to see who was there. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and I couldn't be bothered with any door-to-door person. Instead of any of that though, I saw a woman who looked to be in her early 50s, very smartly dressed with expensive clothes and jewelry as well, stuff I could never afford. Most people around here generally couldn't afford it either. It's not exactly an affluent area. This lady stuck out like a sore thumb because of this. She looked flustered and agitated, glancing toward the back garden, before trying to look through the tiny frosted glass window on the front door. I also noticed she was carrying a dog's lead but didn't have a dog with her. As it happens, at the far side of my back garden, there were 2 hedges. There's the hedge that I own within my property boundaries, and a second hedge outside my boundary that's council-owned, along a small grassland where people tend to walk their dogs. I know for a fact there's a hole in that council-owned hedge, which I've reported to the council at least a dozen times over the past decade, and they've done the square root of sod all about it. Because of my hedge, I can't reach into it and do anything myself. Consequently, when I saw the dog's lead, I thought, man, shit. I bet her dog leapt through that hole. If it was a big dog, it was not getting into my garden, but if it was a small dog, it might be able to work its way through. I figured maybe I could put out some meat and help her lure it out or something. I'm a dog lover, so I wanted to help the woman if I could. When I was a kid, my own dog went missing for several weeks, and I thought I was never going to get him back. I remember that heartbroken feeling as I looked at this woman outside. I opened the door, and the woman gave me the strangest look. It was like she hadn't been expecting me to actually answer the door, almost like I shouldn't be there. To be fair, my mom used to live here instead, so maybe she was expecting my mom or something. I said hello, and she just stared at me for 30 seconds. She kept on trying to look past me, as if trying to see someone else. Then she asked to see Margaret. I apologized and told her there was no Margaret at this address. Again, she gave me that look, only this time there was absolute anger behind it. Yes, there is, she insisted. It occurred to me at this point that I had a relative named Margaret, but she lived hundreds of miles away, and I hadn't seen her in years. Nonetheless, just in case she got the addresses muddled or something, I asked, "Are you looking for my aunt?" She just hissed at me. "You know exactly who I'm looking for. What have you done with her?" Absolutely lost at this point. I'd lived there for 20 years. I knew the name of the previous owner as well, so I knew she wasn't talking about them either. Not the names of the neighbors, not the names of people who have lived on the street in the time I'd been there and since moved away. Nobody was called Margaret. All I could do was tell her she had the wrong address. No, this is my address. You're lying. It was a tad alarming. She had the right address. She hadn't knocked on the wrong door. However, she clearly thought I'd done something to somebody who, to my best knowledge, had never lived there. I don't know how long the previous owner had had this house, but we must have been talking at least 30 years since anyone called Margaret could have possibly lived there. At this point, I also noticed that she'd subtly wrapped the dog lead around her clenched fist, like she was planning to hit me or something. In my youth, I'd had plenty of self-defense training, so I was not exactly scared of this middle-aged woman, but I was obviously a bit concerned about the situation currently brewing. I didn't particularly fancy getting into a brawl on my doorstep with a stranger. I was torn between shutting the door in her face and asking what she really wanted. Look, I don't know who you think you're looking for, but if you think something happened to a friend of yours, maybe you should call the police and let them sort it out. Sure enough, the woman immediately took her fist with the lead wrapped around it and tried to punch at me. She slammed her fist into my door as I closed it. I discovered she'd struck the door hard enough to crack the frosted glass window right in the middle. In fact, her hand was bleeding. It must have hurt quite a bit, but she didn't flinch or show any signs of pain. What the hell? I didn't know what to do in this situation. All I could think now was she must be on something and having a really bad trip. In my scariest voice I could muster, I told her to get the fuck back. I let her know I was calling the police, and if she was still there when they got there, she could deal with them herself, because I was not dealing with her anymore. She tried to shove her hands in to stop me from closing the door, but I shoved her back and managed to slam it closed and lock it. At that point, I stood next to the door while calling 999. While I was waiting for the police to turn up, I watched her on the surveillance feed. She moved in and out of shot multiple times, presumably to check the back of the house. I could hear her calling out for this Margaret over and over. A few minutes before the police finally turned up, I saw her kick over my wheelie bins in a rage, and then the most chilling thing happened. She walked back to the front door and stared right up into the camera. The camera was pretty well hidden too. I'm not saying it's like a ninja or anything and nobody could spot it, but most people would only know it was there if they'd been looking for it, and most people aren't looking for cameras, right? She knew it was there, must have eyeballed it previously. I reviewed all the footage I had from that day later, and she never made eye contact with it once, never looked in that direction. I checked everything I had as well, and she was only on camera that day. All I could think was she must have been there when the oldest footage got overwritten. While she was staring right into it, she made a throat-cutting gesture before walking off in a hurry. I headed to the window, watching her leave. She was walking like she didn't have a care in the world. The police finally showed up, took a statement, and I gave them a copy of the surveillance footage. I called a couple times to follow up, but nothing. Nobody ever called me back about it either. I won't lie, this did affect me for a few weeks. I moved the knife block closer to the door. I started staying up really late and not getting much sleep. On some nights, I was so tired I felt I was experiencing auditory hallucinations. Every time I heard the gate open, it put me on edge. I'd review the surveillance footage every day. Eventually, as the weeks passed on, I hadn't heard anything else, so I started to regain some of my comfort. I put it down to just a weird experience, but that didn't last. About 4 or 5 weeks after the first encounter, she suddenly appeared once again. It was just after midnight. I was in the living room mucking about on my phone with the TV on low volume for some background noise. All of a sudden, I heard a car door slam outside and peeked out the front window. A dark-colored car was parked at the end of my driveway. I didn't see anyone moving about, but about a minute or two later, the front gate swung open with its heavy metallic groaning, and there was a knock at the door. Even if I wasn't involved in a blood feud over imaginary Margaret, I was not going to answer the door at that time. I checked the surveillance camera. The night vision mode was pretty shitty, but I was positive it was that woman again. I could even see the same dog lead. Of course, she must have known I was watching her because she stared right into the camera. And let me tell you, when someone is already giving you the heebie-jeebies, the night vision makes people's eyes look soulless. "Shut that fucking racket off and come out here now!" I had the TV on, but like I mentioned, it was at a very low volume. There was no way she could hear it from outside the door. I couldn't even hear it if I walked to the hallway where the door was at. I was convinced she was mentally unwell. I called the police again. So I'm waiting and waiting for them to arrive, hoping she doesn't start trying to smash a window or something. She begins screaming and yelling, something I couldn't quite make out, but whatever it was enough for one of the neighbors to come and investigate themselves. I watched the neighbor talk to her for a minute. She was still angry about something, wagging her finger toward my front door, but my neighbor was eventually able to get her to leave. He even stuck around for a bit to make sure she was gone. Sadly, that also meant she'd gone before the police turned up again. Another statement, more nothing. I caught up with the neighbor the next day and he apologized because it didn't occur to him to make a note of the plate. He told me she'd said much the same thing as she'd said to me previously though. She wanted to know where Margaret was and what I'd done to her. I was grasping for answers at this point. Even if she was mentally unwell, the fact she was sticking so closely to this story and had the right address as well made me think there was something more to this than somebody just having a breakdown. Something clicked for me. Was Margaret her dog, maybe? Did she think I'd stolen her dog through the hole in the back or something? Did she think I'd hurt them? Is that what this was about? It would be another few weeks before she suddenly appeared again, this time at 3 a.m. I began to hear a light tapping on the bedroom window. I knew immediately it was her. I could hear her saying things, but I couldn't make them out through the muffled sound of the windows. It's like she didn't want the neighbor to come out again, so she was trying to be quiet. I jumped out of bed and put on my clothes as quickly as I could. I tried to follow her best I could as she moved around outside of the house from room to room, tapping and knocking on all the windows and muttering. I could hear her whispering a few coherent words like noise and racket. I'm pretty sure she kept calling me a bitch as well. I couldn't check the surveillance footage this time because she'd spray painted over the lens. She was staying out of sight of the front door as well. I thought about calling the police again, but it had proven a waste of time so far. I got the feeling if I called them a third time and she was already gone, they were going to start accusing me of wasting their time. Even if I did have the evidence, they'd not exactly been helpful so far. In the end, I waited by the front door and listened for her footsteps. Eventually, she knocked on it while I was standing in front. "Is Margaret your dog or something?" I called out. Dead silence. Nothing. I couldn't see anything because it was so dark. I had no idea where she was, and I didn't want to turn the lights on. I ended up standing there for who knows how long, at least an hour before the sun started to come up. My heart was going a mile a minute. Once it was bright enough, I started checking all the windows to see if I could see her anywhere. Nothing. I tentatively opened the front door and looked outside. I still couldn't see her. I grabbed something to arm myself with just in case. I can't even remember what now. I checked all around my house and the back garden. Nowhere to be found. As I was heading back to the front door, I spotted the oddest thing. The gate was closed. The gate that was physically attached to the side of my house. When it opened and closed, it made a fair bit of noise. You'd definitely hear it if someone opened it. You'd definitely hear it if someone opened or closed it when you were standing next to the front door. So what did that mean? Did she jump over it somehow? It's possible, I guess, but I wouldn't want to try it. Anyway, I opened the gate and headed out to the end of the driveway. I looked around, no signs of her still. I turned back to the house, only to see she'd spray-painted "liar" on the front and left the dog lead on the floor beneath it. That was thankfully the last time I heard of or saw this woman, but I still think she comes by sometimes. Ever since this all happened, I get these creeped out feelings occasionally at night and check out the windows. I don't know whether I'm imagining it or not, but every now and again too, I see that dark-colored car out on the street as well. Not parked right at the end of my driveway, mind you. but I can't shake the feeling she's there watching my house. Perhaps she really was looking for her dog and keeps thinking she'll see me with it. I have no idea what to make of all this. First of all, English is not my first language, so I'm sorry if some things sound a bit weird. This story takes place a few years ago, while I was still with my ex-girlfriend. I, male and 22, was around 17 or 18 in this moment. I was living with my parents in a small town of about 300 people. There were 3 farms in this town, which included a lot of fields. We had the habit of walking out in those fields thanks to a small path which was fairly old. There was place enough for 1 car, truck, or tractor. It was around the afternoon, 5 or 6 p.m. We decided to go out into a field and have a picnic. We could see the road and the people on the road could see us, so it would be fairly safe. The field belonged to my neighbor, who was okay with us doing things like this every now and then. The field was also separated from the road thanks to a barbed wire fence. We smoked some weed, we drank, we listened to music and ate. Everything was going well. At one point though, we heard a car park in the middle of the road. A man got out of the car and went into the bushes. At this point, I thought someone must have stopped because they had to use the restroom or something, but I kept an eye on him just in case. I talked with my girlfriend like I'd done all afternoon until then, when I looked back at where the man was. This time, he was no longer in the bush. He was standing still, crouching behind his car, looking right at us, motionless. I didn't say anything. I looked back at my girlfriend. I was feeling unnerved. I gave another quick look, only to see the man had now moved to the other end of his car and was doing the same thing. No motion. Just looking at us crouching behind it. The process repeated 2 or 3 times, with him moving all around his car. I was suddenly feeling very weird. This situation couldn't possibly be normal. The guy then suddenly jumped into his car and drove away in a hurry. At this moment, I told my girlfriend to pack up our things. We were going to leave right now. She thought I was overreacting, thinking I was being paranoid because of the weed we had smoked. But still, she listened to my advice. We were back on the road, going the opposite direction the guy had gone. The road was a circle though, with every way leading back to my house and then the main road. Guess who had turned around and was coming up right behind us in his car? That guy, now staring at us while driving. He kept driving around the road again and again, passing by us, multiple times. At this moment, my girlfriend told me I was right. We took his plate and tried to call my parents, but no one was answering. The last time the guy passed us by, I could clearly see something was now in his passenger seat, but I couldn't tell what. All of a sudden, my neighbor came up right behind him with his truck. I stopped my neighbor and told her what was going on. She told us to jump inside, and we went back to my parents' home. My dad is a cop, so I told him the plate number, and he looked into it. The car belonged to some old grandma and was apparently stolen. A few weeks later, as I did every day, I went to take my bus to the next town. It was about a 7-minute bike ride away from my home to the bus stop. It was still dark because it was pretty early in the morning. When I left my parents' home on my bike, I noticed a light behind me. It was that same car. I don't know how he knew this was my route. Maybe it was pure bad luck on my part, but I'm 100% sure it was him. He followed me until I took a detour down a path which a car couldn't use. Only bikes and pedestrians could take it. I turned off all my bike lights and rode until I got to my bus stop in the complete darkness in order to not be seen and followed by the man further. I kept doing it this way for the next 2 years, and I never met that man again.